Good afternoon, everyone. We just launched this report through Honorable Mr. Amitabh Kant on intercity private operations in India. So it is a report which deals with highlights about the first initially in terms of what has been the electrification journey in India, what has been the role of private sector, and then the report dwells into the initiative of private sector initiatives that have happened in India, and most of them we have tried to focus and do this more in terms of case study oriented analysis, in terms of what are the existing operators, what it is working, why is it working for them, and how they are dealing with the current scenario in terms of regulation, infrastructure, as well as all the policy initiatives that are in place. Majority of these have been aimed towards public, but that's what we'll delve more into this discussion. So just to give you an overview, India has around 2.5 million registered buses, out of which 6% of these buses are under the STUs, and 94% of these are owned and operated by private operators. So all the initiatives that you know so far about the PM E-Bus Seva, PM E-Drive, FAME 1, FAME 2, there have been penetration of around 30,000 buses. Majority of the schemes, almost all the scheme is made to aim towards the public sector, but little efforts has been taken towards the private sector or initiation of schemes towards the private sector. And if you see, we have different types of segmentation for buses in India. They are divided by length, fuel type, ownership, and use cases. I'm just gonna go fast through this, and you can just read the facts and figures. Uh, One of the important figure is of these 25 million buses, and of course the 94% buses, we have this perception that the market is definitely fragmented in India. We have lots of operators who have less than 5% buses, and those form more than like 60%. But if you see, 95% of the operators run fewer than 50 buses. But if you see, the top 5% of the operator control 60% of the fleet. So that is a huge number in terms of, if you see, we can do in terms of the capacity and the market size. Here I have just provided in terms of what scheme has done what under what initiative. And if you see, the support for intercity buses in terms of charging infrastructure has been recently done under the PM E-Drive scheme. Under the PM E-Drive scheme, we have some of one of the main factor is 40 highway. They have identified 40 highway corridors where they would probably install charging infrastructure and provide support for that. And that has been done under PM E-Drive scheme. One of the important factor and what we can say more of like a revolutionary milestone that India has achieved is about the demand aggregation in public buses. And there are conversations if the demand aggregation. But the main factor of demand aggregation is you aggregate the demand from states, from multiple STUs, and it brings down and do an aggregated tender, and it brings down the per kilometer cost. So it has been explored, and it is in conversations if such aggregators, since we saw 5% of the operator control 61% of the fleet, if that kind of demand aggregation can be brought amongst the private operators, and we can facilitate intercity operations in India. So there is discussions about that, but we haven't reached conclusions yet. So lot of it is, we have lots of barriers in terms of the operating landscape, the regulatory landscape. AITP is one of the major issue, and of course we can see lots of private operators bear demand for fuel and risk, and there is a perception that maybe EVs, and if there is a standard in electricity rate, that can change that. So we did a TCO, and in one of these TCOs, we found out that if you optimize battery and charging infrastructure through opportunity charging, you can reduce almost up to 17% of your operation cost per kilometer. And if you see, taking into consideration the battery cost, after the 5th year, the operation cost actually falls. because the maintenance in electric buses is quite low because of the less number of moving parts. These are some of the challenges that we identified from with our interviews with the private operators. Majority of it is the high upfront cost of the electric buses. Then scaling up on Intercity, because there is a lot of regulatory ambiguity over there. There is no, because we have lots of permits. There's a stage carriage, there's a contract carriage, and also AITP is there. But lots of states do create an issue with the AITP. And some of it can be, and through interviews, some of them are, what you can say, asking for if there is battery operating services. Battery as a service can be one of the options. Like Kansa said, like leasing options can be one of the services that can be provided. It can actually reduce the overall cost and upfront cost. And of course, we'll discuss more about this in our panel. And now I would like to invite my panel. I would call upon stage Jeet from FLIXBUS, Deepro from the Quantum Hub, and Anantha from C40. Can you hear me? So Devendra Chawla was supposed to join us, but there is reports of flooding in Gurgaon. So it has created an issue. So we saw, and you, all of you have been in this sector for quite a while now, and you must be knowing a lot of the regulatory aspect and everything. I'll just dwell into this right away. So I'll start with Jeet. FLIXBUS launched its operation, I think, around last year in India, and it has been expanding quite well. And I believe at your first year anniversary, you also inaugurated the electric bus services. So can you shed a light in terms of like a journey, in terms of how difficult was it easy? And what is the current scenario so far with the Flix?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Bhaumik, and thank you, ICCT, for inviting me. I'm Jeet. I represent FLIXBUS, which is one of the large intercity bus operators and technology platforms across the world. We are present in 44 countries, and we launched our services in India in February 2024. So in a little more than a year and a half, we have now been able to expand to north, south, and west zones of India and run a fleet of 250 plus buses in India now. Out of that, a very small fraction is EV. We hope to scale up our EV deployment over time. And I'm obviously happy to share our experience of driving the EV initiative within FLIXBUS. So, couple of things that we need to understand first of all about FLIXBUS is that we are primarily a technology platform. We are asset light, so we work with local bus operators, typically small bus operators who have 5 to 10 buses, to provide their assets to us, which then we monetize, right, through our technology capabilities, which range from network planning, pricing, marketing, through performance marketing, and so on. So when we started thinking about EV seriously, our main sort of concern was to understand what would it take for a small operator who's a private bus operator to buy an EV. So there were some challenges, of course, there, and we'll double click on all of these as we kind of proceed. So first is, of course, upfront cost, which you already mentioned, Bhaumik. Then clear, transparent information on TCO. We referred to certain secondary sources, and we saw that there's a disparity in the understanding around TCO, between ICE buses and e-buses. So for quite some time, our decision making was delayed because we just didn't know what type of vehicle performance data we can rely on, what are the costs on the ground, what are the AMCs being charged by different OEMs and so on. So that's another sort of piece of analysis that we had to crack before we took this proposition to bus operators. And then, of course, there have been certain challenges that we have faced just ahead of the EV deployment, like closer to once we had a date and we had an operator and we knew that we can do EV on a certain line where charging is available and so on. We started running into some of these challenges around AITP, which you also mentioned, which is always a dampener, right? Which is for private intercity operators, a problem area. And because of that, they are more risk averse today. They are not, they don't enjoy the kind of breathing room that helps them think about EV transition. And that also slows down EV deployment in this category of bus operators for sure. And then just after the EV launch, we have also started running into certain challenges around power outages, lack of skills amongst people who are running our EV line, our first EV line in Vijayawada, Hyderabad. And couple of other miscellaneous challenges that I'll take up later. But that's sort of a broad overview of what we do and what has been the sort of over top line challenges that we have had in terms of EV deployment.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of follow-up questions on that, but I think I'll go one by one and then we'll circle back. I want to ask you, Deepro, the quantum of, I remember you had done a session in terms of regulatory aspect, and you have also launched a report regarding that. So can you just shed a light and like open this in terms of what are the regulatory barriers and what are the potential challenges which regulations can face, not just in terms of the permits, but also in terms of infrastructure, access to depots. If you can talk more about that if you can initiate a conversation on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bhaumik. Thank you for having me here. So, as you mentioned, the Quantum Hub had published a report on the All India tourist permit. We'd done it with FLIXBUS. And the idea being that, there was a feeling that AITP was passed with a certain intention, but it did not sort of take that form over time with the implementation, with some of the wordings of the drafting, etc. So just the idea for doing this report was to understand what were the main issues with the AITP and how they can be solved. Now, just to clarify, we did the report from the perspective, more from the IC perspective than the EV perspective, but it will apply going forward to the EV for sure, because anyone entering the intercity segment will face the same problems because they'll have to get the AITP permit. Now, coming to the permit itself, the regulations itself, there are various problems that all stakeholders face, right from your bus operators to passengers to state and central governments. If I can start with the bus operators, the first issue I think that everyone faces is the complexity of regulations and taxes. You've got your contract carriage, stage carriage, and then AITP. AITP somewhat falls in the middle, but not exactly. Tourist vehicle is defined as contract carriage, but as per AITP, you can also take groups or individuals, which sort of goes into the stage carriage domain. So there's quite a bit of confusion as to what is legal when it comes to AITP and what is not. And bus operators get caught in between, even though they, in their minds, would be thinking that we are operating legally. And this leads to a lot of harassment, stopping at state borders, etc. So that's one issue in terms of this complex permit system. As you mentioned, the taxes are also pretty complex. There's the first registration fee in the particular state, then there's the AITP for running it across the country. And even though all states agreed that there won't be any border taxes after AITP is implemented, border taxes are there still in quite a few of the states. And especially in the EV context, if you are to be investing so much capital, which is probably more than your other types of vehicles, and then you have to deal with these taxation issues. Although right now I don't know whether they have to deal with the similar taxation issues, but given it's there in the rules, they will likely probably have to face it in the future. So that's something that needs to be clarified going forward. Not only clarified, but given that the central ministry has come up with notifications saying that there should not be any border taxes, it is clear that ideally should be followed, because all states came together to agree on AITP and pass the regulations. So that's another issue faced by bus operators. Other than that, another issue, and this is coming to the point that you mentioned, infrastructure, is access to state bus depots. Now, Delhi is a exception in that regard. They've allowed ISPT access to more private operators. Most states don't. And that's a issue not only for bus operators in the quality of service they're providing, But for passengers, in that they have to then get on the bus in random places on the road, becomes a safety issue, might become a law and order issue. So it really goes beyond just the transport sector. Uh, that's on the bus operator side. From the state government side, AITP again hasn't worked as well as one would have thought from the revenue perspective, because I believe the larger earning states like Tamil Nadu, etc., have to recourse to border taxes, and that's playing out in how AITP is implemented, in that it's basically a selective implementation of particular regulations, which is again not good for anybody involved. And if you're looking at EV right now, if someone is looking to invest in the EV sector and looks at the AITP regulations and thinks that, okay, this is what the government will implement, this is what it won't implement, it's a confusing situation. It's not ideal for investment. And then coming to I would say the most important part of this, the passengers who suffer from both ends. There are RTO flying squads that stop buses. Often the poor passengers get harassed, they get brought down, etc. They don't have good infrastructure where they can wait for the bus to come. Again, this goes back to the ISBT private buses being allowed on ISBT. So all of this put together, I think, has caused a situation where AITP being passed with such good intentions hasn't quite created a scenario where all those good intentions have come out to play. And that's not necessarily because all stakeholders don't want it, but probably because all stakeholders need to sort of protect their own interests. So there needs to be a little more coming together of heads, I think. And I know there's the TD Transport Development Council in place for things like this. But maybe AITP needs to be looked at specifically. And again, this is very relevant in the EV context, because if we are moving from ICE to EV, then at least if it's the same regulations that will sort of rule both, then it has to be a consistent regulation that attracts investment, that attracts people to say that, okay, this is consistent and we can get in this system, rather than something that is confusing and one doesn't know where one will get in trouble.
Lot of it is always like the states some of the states have issues where they claim that the buses are registered in different state, and you run buses in our state, you pay taxes over there. So it's a lot of issue which needs to be addressed, and there needs to be a solution on that. And access to depot is also one of the key issues and one of the major barriers that has also come out in our studies, because if you have to have a depot, or if you have to, first of all, like, none of the ICE vehicle operators have to worry ever about where they would refuel the petrol and all that, but e-bus operators always have to think about chargers. So they have to buy lands in cities. Highway charging, many of them said highway charging is not an issue, you will probably get it. But what about your depot spaces and your charging stations which are in the city? Because land in city is extremely costly, and you cannot, and that elevates your upfront cost by a lot. So can you just talk a little bit more in terms of these access, and how, if can be change in bylaws and all that, which can allow access of private operators to these? And also, Jeet, if you can give some Flix perspective, because I think you have done some partnership with Delhi government on that. So
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, look, first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge what is the status of private intercity operators within the larger sort of bus ecosystem in India, right? Most operators today are operating almost in a gray zone because of all of the issues that Deepro also pointed towards. What this leads to is lack of access to terminals. In Delhi, we got lucky in a way, right? Because DTC didn't have that many long haul, and I'm just talking about intercity, right? Long haul mein DTC didn't have that many routes and so on. So for whatever reason, they came to this decision that we will open access to terminals and we will have all private guys come and use our terminals, right? Um, However, in a lot of other states, the view is exactly the opposite, which is that terminal infrastructure is the property of the STUs, and private intercity guys can never have access to them, right? With the exception of very small terminals, And also couple of new terminals that have come out, right? I mean, in Chennai, we got access to Kilambakam, Kalainagar, Centenary bus terminal, couple of others, exceptions are there. But this is at the core of why private intercity operators are not getting into charging, because at least OD point charging, origin destination point charging, should be there, right? Now, on his own expense, the guy cannot set up a charging, probably doesn't have an interest in becoming a CPO. So, first port of call is the government. That is the government able to provide me charging similar to, a passenger car, passenger EV? The answer is currently no. For most routes, this public charging infrastructure at OD point is not available. On the highways, yes, but OD point charging, needs to be solved for through terminal access. Uh, that's number one. Number two, there are lots of underutilized lands in depots of STUs, right? This is again like I think level 2, where once STUs change their mindset and work more collaboratively with the private guys, they can also potentially look at monetizing some of their depot lands by opening it up. And anyway, depot electrification is going on. In Delhi, it's happening, other states, it's happening. Why not open up these depots for charging of private buses as well? And another sort of finer point within this is that off-peak, charging, which is generally the requirement of our sector, intercity, right? That's anyway a problem outside, right? That, in terms of price efficiencies, off-peak charging can be, reduced, the tariffs can be reduced, and demand for off-peak charging can be increased greatly in all charging infrastructure across the country, right? So that's already a sort of issue that's being talked about that can then be kind of mapped onto these depots which are being electrified, and the STUs of the country can go out and say that we will make the depot accessible. For starters, we will only allow off peak, because during peak hours our own buses will come and charge. We don't want to prioritize you. But start with off peak, start at lower tariffs and see how the demand picks up, right? And how you're able to then monetize your depot land assets and so on, right? And if even one or two states can make this into a success story, Flix and others can come in and sort of, use these facilities and drive that narrative forward elsewhere. So that's what I wanted to say.
So, to add to this, actually, I have been part of these tendering process for buses for the government, and we do include these clauses, and even the government mandates to include these clauses, that off-peak and all that timing, other buses should be allowed to do the charging, and that's how also to earn the revenue. But in terms of optimizing the charging and cost, a lot of it has not happened, but there is no clarity, because most of the charging infrastructure is given inside the depot, but there is no clarity or there is no relaxation on who can enter the depot. So that is also one of the key barriers that private operators have to face. If you do not have access to depots, then how are you going to charge, even if you have put it in the tender documents, and even if you're giving that opportunity to private operator to provide it to somebody who's an external and not the city bus facility. So that's one of the issue I also wanted to highlight. I want to go to Anantha now. So C40 is partner with ICCT for the Zebra initiative, and we have been working on a lot of initiatives across the world in 3 geographies basically for Zebra. And C40 looks a lot in terms of financing aspect of these buses as well as technical considerations. So if you could shed light and talk in terms of, you're also working on a report for this, for the Zebra initiative. So can you please go ahead and talk on the financing, which is the major issue of everything?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Bhaumik. I think I would definitely like to categorize some of the challenges what we are talking today with respect to intercity e-buses into 4 to 5 categories. Definitely, financing challenges is one of the first category, and you have infrastructure challenges, and you have operational challenges, and you have regulatory and policy challenges. These are some of the 5 categories. Most of the challenges which you see fall into the space. And for all these challenges to be understood, the operator also should have an idea like where their particular operational challenge or the financial challenge is going to fall into the category, and how they can come up with some innovative financial as well as business models to overcome this kind of challenges. And for private operators, especially, they are not in the category of public operators, like where they have to go for a GCC model or any other model. They have scope for a lot of innovation, and this innovative business models, especially testing out and see based on their operational conditions, there's a lot of leverage which they can make out by being asset light models, going with an asset light models, or they can also partner with asset light models and operate the services, or they can only own the asset and partner with a charging as a service operator, or they can also come up with battery as a service. So there are many models which are emerging. That's what we have been observing based on our consultation with different stakeholders. So our study mainly focused on like 4 cities, understanding what are the intercity operations which are happening right now, and try to get an overview of like what are the operational distance which these particular operators are operating right now, and in their current operations, what are the barriers or the challenges they face for this EV transition to happen. Is it financial challenge? Is it infrastructure challenge? Is it operational challenge? Or is it the policy or the regulatory aspects? So taking all into consideration, definitely we see that this innovative business and financial models, what we are discussing, has an opportunity for them to make sure that this transition can happen and not to be left alone, because not every operator, because most of the operators are small fleet operators, they will not be able to resolve all the ecosystem challenges. There is definitely a need for a collaborative platform where all the ecosystem players have to come together and share their experiences, like what they offer in this platform and how each of them can collaborate with each other, and how the small fleet operators also can be part of the entire ecosystem. Unless until the fleet operators buy in your models or even understand the nuances like this transition is feasible, I have to be like a 100% asset light or a 75% asset light, or I can go for a smaller battery pack and these are my operations. I need not have to own a battery. If these models are not explained, or even they are not able to test these models and understand how their TCO is going to fare out, or by when they are going to make a TCO parity with these different models, there is no readiness from the private operators, especially to even enter into this segment. So these are some of the barriers. Definitely, I would suggest like we have an opportunity. I would see this as an opportunity, and there is scope for many innovative business models to come here. All it needs like put forth the best case models. Like one is definitely the FLIXBUS, which they're doing, and there are other business models also which are in the platform. But showcasing these models and making sure that this transition is viable financially as well as operationally viable for the small fleet operators is the important challenge which we need to tackle.
Thank you so much. On that, I actually wanted to ask question, and all three of you can answer as convenient. So basically, do you think there could be like a common platform where the private operators, the government, and the financial stakeholders can come? Because a lot of we think the segment is fragmented, and but many of them have actually a lot, like 5%, like I said, many of them actually have big fleets. So do you think such platform, any kind of platform sort of initiated or like an accelerator platform, can actually help most of the private operators? And in this also, like I wanted to come to Flix also in this, basically as an aggregator. Like I know Flix has one of the largest fleet in Europe, and you also run a train in Europe. So do you think in India you can be like one of those aggregators specifically? All three of you can answer this question about the platform for sure.
So interesting you ask about one platform for private app operators, etc. If you remember the our report launch, we had the parliamentary committee chief on Ministry of Roads and Transport there, and he was very interested in hearing the bus operators' views. He seemed to have not heard that view about AITP before, even though he was the parliamentary committee chief of Road and Transport. So I think it's very important that these messages reach to people who are in decision-making positions. Of course, it's easier to say that and then to put together that platform. But I think there are current mechanisms that can be leveraged. I mentioned the TDC earlier. TDC often creates committees amongst itself to decide issues like AITP. I don't see it as too much of a stretch to see a TDC-like body creating a separate committee where it invites private players, both let's say ICE or EV, to discuss matters that are otherwise only being discussed at the TDC level. In fact, these are some of the things that I think civil society and from the operator side should push for, because the answers to all the questions that we are asking today can't be solved only from the state or government side. It needs technical skills, etc. So yeah, I think it's well possible, and I think it requires effort not only from the government side but also from industry and civil society side to make it happen.
I think definitely as a proof of concept, one case study has to be demonstrated with a collaborative platform wherein every player has a different component which they can bring in and understand the nuances, and then that can feed into the policy making, because right now the policy is only focused on 10% of the fleet what we have right now, electrification of that, but we have a larger fleet which we are not focusing, which is 90% owned by the private operators. The policy has to cater holistically to all these operators so that this particular transition can lead into India's net zero targets in the future. So definitely there is a whole linkage and an ecosystem approach which is needed for this kind of transition to happen.
As for me, I'm actually not a big believer in a platform being part of a solution for this. Of course, there are private sector platforms like us, which are tech platforms. We'll provide the tech to operators that want to be associated with us, right? But we can't really help the whole ecosystem. To an extent, we've been able to push this idea with the finance community that if an operator has a contract with Flix, right, that they are a FLIXBUS, operator, then it makes them obviously more bankable because there's a commercial agreement between a very reliable company and them. And even if their books are not in the best health or whatnot, they are, immediately seem as more credit worthy, right, to a leasing entity or a NBFC or whatever it is, right? But that's only part of the solution. I think we have to go to the heart of the issue. Heart of the issue is that transport regulations are under the states. No government and nobody in the center can force the states to act in a certain way, right? If they don't want to. And Bhaumik, you referred to our experience globally. How that experience does not translate into India is that in India, bus services are looked at as a social service. Till such time that bus services are seen as social service only, that only the poor want to take a bus, right? And there is no need for a premium bus. Government and regulators don't really understand the AC bus category much. They think anybody who's not poor who wants to go intercity will either take train or plane, right? Till this mindset shift happens where government looks at providers of high quality premium intercity bus services as a true partner to driving the future of mobility in this country and actually complementing the government's own good work in expanding expressways and highways in this country, not much progress will happen, either in terms of growth of the intercity segment or fleet electrification within it, right? So let's be clear about that. Now, what can be done by the central government over and above what it has done already? First of all, it has done all of these schemes to drive EV deployment, right? It hasn't touched the bus segment as much as we would have liked to. But to an extent, the GCC model has taken off. As you mentioned, demand aggregation through CESL has taken off, and so on and so forth, right? So now a lot of STUs have electric buses, but they're still, I think, in single digit thousands, if I'm not wrong. EV sales in India are single digit thousands in a country where we have how many? 2.5 million buses, right? Really, there's lots of scope for improvement, and till we don't push back against these two assumptions. Number one, buses are only for the poor. And number two, therefore, buses should be heavily regulated and dominated by the STUs, right? There will be no progress in the country. So, coming back to what can be done over and above schemes, etc., which push the GCCs and all of that, which are all tied to the government. End of the day, private operators are basically becoming contractors. For a company like that, us, it's irrelevant, right? A lot of these schemes are irrelevant, and I can tell you, very confidently on behalf of one of the largest intercity private bus companies in the world, we have no interest in deploying EVs tied up into some consortium with an OEM and then working as a subcontractor for some STU. Thank you, but we will skip that. Right? Now, what the center can do is look at maybe an index, bus operations index or whatever, like in terms of ease of running buses, right? If something like that can be developed, where the center gives a strong nudge to states which are laggards, right, in terms of implementing AITP, because again, everywhere I go and meet with state authorities, they talk about how AITP buses don't pay SRTs, right, the state road tax. It's a pain point for them. Government has to figure it out, right? Central government has to work with state government to figure out that if you're a Tamil Nadu and your road density is very high, until yesterday you were earning a lot of state road taxes through giving contract carriage, stage carriage, whatever, and now you're not, because a lot of the buses are getting an AITP. How you solve for that? And Deepro and TQH have recommended already some steps, but that's not my problem, right? My expectation is that you solve it so that I can serve the customer better. And circling back to what Deepro mentioned, right? Like, look at where the passenger is today. Because he or she is, either actually poor or perceived to be poor, nobody cares about the passenger who's being stopped at a border and has to unnecessarily wait, because the guys at this thing are running a illegal offline check post. It's not one nation, one permit. You're not supposed to do it. But in spite of so many notifications from the central government, there are still states where there are offline checkposts at the borders, right? What happens to the passenger when a flying squad stops a bus and says, "Arey, you're making multiple stops, this is not allowed under AITP," right? What happened to Atiti, Debo, Bhava and all of your other sort of, initiatives around tourism promotion, right? Forget about my internal company parameters and metrics, right, around timely performance, customer feedback, all of that can go, has to an extent gone out of the window. Thankfully, we've been able to, make HQ understand that, it's not possible to do, some of that stuff in India yet, but we would ideally want to go there. Until the time that this whole intercity bus segment is looked at as something that is a sort of social service for people who can't afford any better, I don't think we will make no platform can come in and change that mindset, right? It has to be done by state governments, which look at, interstate movement of tourists as beneficial to themselves and their neighboring states. It is not going to happen.
A lot of it is, of course, transport is always a state issue, and there is always this perception of buses being like the poor person's mode of transport. But what people don't know, that buses in India on a daily basis carry around 399 million people across this country. And that's a stated facts like everywhere. Almost intercity transport alone in India, there are almost 228 million trips that happen in the intercity segment. And that's a huge number. That's almost 10 times that of Indian Railways and almost 30 times that of the aviation sector. So buses truly are the lifeline of this country when I say that. And a lot of it has been like, so one of the issues I always have, and of course, one fact I would like to highlight is, even though the entire bus segment in India is just 1% of the total vehicle fleet, but it contributes to 15% of the total roadway emission. So that's one of the reasons why, if we have to have the entire narrative of Vikasit Bharat in place and net zero in place, we need to make sure that all these buses are electrified. And I'm hoping someday it would happen. But one of the three things I would just like to, I think we're also running out of time. But one thing is, there is lack of data. And I think, Anantha, you can take this question as a research organization. One of the key aspects is there is lack of data in the segment. We don't know where these buses are running, how these buses are running. If we come to know that data through tollways, and if that data is made transparent, maybe that would also accelerate the market in some way. And even in terms of where to put the charging infrastructure, how to place the charging, and even this question, I'll come to the DISCOM's question later. But maybe you can just put
Absolutely. I think once when you know the operational patterns of the private bus operators, it will definitely help to improve the infrastructure provision. Say, for instance, some of the buses operate like 120 or 150 kilometers. It can be a round trip. There's no need for charging infrastructure. You can have charging infrastructure at the origin because your destination is going to be the same. If your trip moves beyond 150 to 250, you might need a charging infrastructure at the origin as well as the destination, but you don't need in between where you're traversing. So this kind of operational characteristics definitely help, like where you have to put the infrastructure, and if you're going beyond 350, you need at the origin, at the destination, and in between top-up charges are needed. So these are some important trip characteristics where we need to understand from the private bus operators, and that will also help to like what kind of battery requirement will be needed if you're going for different business models. And also this will help to reduce your upfront overall asset cost, that you don't need to own a battery of 350 kilowatt hour if you're not operating on that route, or your route pattern is not related to that. So that will help them to reduce their asset capital, huge capital investment cost, and also optimally design the charging infrastructure requirement. Either charging as a service could help them to reduce the burden overall. So this information definitely feeds into a larger ecosystem planning.
Definitely. Yeah, please go ahead.
Something that also came to my mind after hearing her, when it comes to data and basing regulation on data, right? Where these buses are going, how they're traveling, etc. Something we heard from multiple private operators during our study was that when the regulations, the stage carriage, contract carriage, etc., had been thought of, the idea was that at least for contract carriage, people go in groups, they hire an entire bus, they go for a journey, they visit some place, and they come back. Therefore, the rules state that you have to get the entire bus, you have to have that passenger list, etc. But that doesn't happen anymore. I don't think tourism exists in that form that prevalently anymore. So as we are looking forward to EV, and if we are looking at newer regulations specific to EV, that data becomes more important as how people are traveling. Is it that same as what happened in the 1950s and 60s, where people are going on tours and just taking that entire bus, or are they stopping at specific points, etc.? That becomes really, really important. And I think the private operators realize this, but I don't know whether that realization has reached the government to act on it, which should happen soon enough.
Yeah. Definitely, and I wanted to, any of you can answer this question related to discoms. So, main thing about discoms is basically from our interviews with the operators, what we have came to know that they are selling the electricity per kilowatt at a much higher rate. So is there anything that can be done regarding this, or like I just want to, I mean, I know that none of you are from the discom side, but if you have any, if you can shed some light on the way discoms operate, because for example, every time this question actually, this problem actually arises every time about the electricity rate and the higher markups. So is there any and also is there any regulatory aspect in which we can limit this high markups? So if you can just put a light on that.
I will not be going into the regulatory aspects, but at least the cost per kilowatt, what they are charging, it all depends on like whether they have the charging infrastructure utilization rate, and also like what money they have spent to set up that upstream infrastructure. So if that upstream infrastructure cost is taken care by the current policy initiatives what we have in India, that can definitely turn the market. Because this is not something which is new to India. It's already happening in the public bus sector. But since it is on the highways, we are not focusing much. If that infrastructure also been given due importance as we are doing in the public sector, considering that the infrastructure along highways also are part of our public infrastructure, which can strengthen public-private partnerships and then make this transition happen in a larger scale. So these are some things which need to be taken up from the upstream infrastructure investments from Government of India, maybe from their regulatory aspects from Ministry of Power. Maybe instead of doing at 25 kilometers, they could start with 100. That will also build some momentum. And then see on an experimental basis like which corridors are picking up, where the infrastructure is being better utilized. They can go increasing that frequency on either side, and then go for 50 kilometers and then 25 kilometers. It should be more of a step-by-step process where you have to put in infrastructure based on the utilization patterns.
Definitely. And wayside amenities specifically play a lot of importance in this. And I hope they develop that properly, because I traveled from Mumbai to Delhi via car once and none of it was operational. And because we had to literally get down at a petrol pump, get down through an exit and go 25 kilometers inside the village. So I think that is one of the key issues also. Like, we are developing highways, but we also need to have these facilities in place. Of course, they are made spaces for that, but there needs to be some kind of intervention in that aspect.
Yeah, again, I wanted to add the user perspective, right? I think whoever is the stakeholder, whether it is Ministry of Power or any other, right, they have to pay attention to a couple of things which are also challenges we are facing as operators now, which is that what is the experience of a long haul bus journey? If you are riding a bus for 4 hours, 5 hours, typically you want to end the journey as quickly as possible with like maybe a 15 to 20-minute break in between for, refreshment. And then you want to be at your destination. You don't necessarily want to spend too much unnecessary time stopping somewhere. Now, if you are looking at a 13.5 meter chassis bus as you would find on a FLIXBUS, the time to charge that bus on an 80% SOC is not 25 minutes for sure. It's higher than that, right? So risk on the operator that, if I am stopping the bus for longer than what the passenger expects, tomorrow he may not come back to me, right? Then on top of that, if there is a power outage, right? What does that do to the operator, the small operator that's working with Flix and running a large electric bus today? So, reliable service, harmonized tariffs, and we can start with maybe some pilots. And I invite ICCT to think about this as a pilot that you can drive. Say in the quadrilateral or like this golden triangle, right? Delhi, Jaipur, Agra, or couple of other states down south where there is well-developed tourist route. Why can they not cooperate with each other to just harmonize the tariff? So operators have clarity at what point they have to pay how much, where should they charge, and they should not have to be too concerned about actually charging in one state before they go over to the other state. They know charging is available, the entire charging network becomes available to me. And just a funny anecdote, by the way, in Hyderabad, Vijayawada, we have now had to encourage our CPO to invest in a diesel generator. So this is where real India shows up, where because of power outages up to sometimes 1 hour, our passengers have been giving us feedback, and that we take very seriously. And therefore now we have said, thank you very much for taking the high upfront cost of putting an infrastructure in place. Now also put in a diesel generator, right? And we've had to do that, thing.
Yeah, that's okay. So we are running short of time, and I also want to open questions. But any final remarks? Then we can actually go to questions.
Just one final one that I also missed while kind of talking about our journey into deploying electric bus. Product availability. That's again on the OEM community, I think, where because I think how e-bus manufacturing has been promoted in India, right? Linked with the FAME scheme and other such subsidy schemes. OEMs have not independently thought about creating very high quality, products that we can bring onto our platform as e-buses. In the sort of 13.5 meter category, couple of products have come in. And we are very thankful that they are available, but they are still not available within the timeline that we would like. And very often the reason for that is OEMs are backed up with orders from STUs, which they are one way or the other arm twisted to deliver before private sector, right? So maybe not much can be done about that, but they need to make more products available, prioritize on the private sector needs in terms of what products are required for intercity, very different from intracity, and spare part availability. As certain OEMs now are becoming more dominant in more than one region and becoming sort of national OEMs, right? So far, the electric sort of space was, dominated by regionally dominant OEMs. Now what's happening is that we deployed a bus that we got from an OEM in the north zone, and the spare parts are not available in time. Again, downtime of the bus goes up, and lots of this unpredictability, right? These are the sort of nascent stages where ourselves, NewGo, couple of other brands are only doing EVs in the private space, completely divorced, completely separate from any public sector, contract, GCC, whatever, right? At this stage, if our investors and our leadership is not convinced that it can be done seamlessly without losing customers and losing our business, then the scale up becomes even more challenging, right? That's the last one that I think OEMs can own.
Yeah, no. Supply side, there is a lot of backup on backlog on that, because many of the operators we go, they have put in orders for electric buses, but it's been like more than 6 months. They still haven't received buses, and majority of the demand is actually catered to, and majority of the products also are catered to the GCC contracts for city buses majorly, and little has been done innovation for intracity. So yeah, definitely get that point, and we have heard about that point a lot. Yeah, please, Deepro.
Yeah, I'd like to make a more procedural point, I think, rather than a substantive. The AITP issue we worked on, and it's only been the last 1 year or so that we've been working on this. But one thing was clear while talking to stakeholders, that at least with private bus operators, there seemed to be a sense of resignation with some of the issues that AITP has come up with, that aisa hi hai, ab kya kare. But when they met the right person to discuss the issue, etc., that passion came out from the other side. The authorities seemed to listen. I think, going back to your earlier question on platforms, I didn't mean tech platforms, I meant physical platforms. More of them need, and maybe ICCT is one of those types of organizations that can create such platforms, but there needs to be more platforms like this platform itself, where this engagement can happen, and even the smaller players can be heard out, because I think that's very important even for the EV sector as we go along.
Anantha, do you think Zebra can be that platform?
Why not? I think one of the important aspect which we need to look into intercity e-buses is there is also a need for demand signaling. Unless until the aggregated demand signaling is not visible, we can't expect the OEMs or the supply side to even cater to that demand. So even that demand, what we are seeing right now in the public sector, is also because of the aggregation of the demand from the public sector, and then putting it that this is the kind of demand which is available, then the supply side was able to cater to that demand. Similarly, if that kind of aggregation can happen in the intercity e-bus segment also, that can influence the capital cost definitely, and that will also help the supply side to even access their incentives what they're getting from the government under PLI and other schemes and everything. So that also gives signaling to them that okay, this is the opportunity what we have right now, because not every OEM is ready. Like they are not even keen. Like okay, which private operator is going to come to me? Like, am I going to get like 5 e-bus demand, or I'm going to get 2 e-bus demand? I don't think that is lucrative enough for them to even step into that. So they always look for like a demand aggregation signal. If those signals are available, definitely I think those issues can be solved, because from the supply side, they can handle lot. I mean, 4 times they have the capacity if you look at the capacity things, but that kind of signaling has to happen.
Thank you so much. It's a lot to summarize, but we are running out of time. I will take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. And yeah, please go ahead.
So my question is more of an outlook question from Mr. Banerjee. So sir, if we look at tier 2 and tier 3 cities, I think we have a lot of demand, because most of the people living in tier 1 cities are immigrants that come from that area. So if FLIXBUS was to cover that demand and supply with a little, I think, a discount at that area. So do you have an outlook for the next 5 years if you could have a model in this region?
At a discount, you mean favorable pricing?
At favorable pricing, this experience that would then affect the perception that the buses are only for poor people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are very committed to providing our services at affordable cost. Very often, we in fact come under fire from our local competitors for undercutting the market a little bit. I must state very clearly that we only do it for promotional purposes within very select period of time. It is not something that we do on a sustained basis. But because of how the regulatory structure is, actually it's very difficult to do that, because most of the local bus operators in a particular route who are dominant will have a cartel, right? They would actually sometimes try and force us to price the product as per their price list or rate card or whatever it is, right? But 100% we are committed. We are now connecting upwards of 350 destinations. Most of them would be tier 2, tier 3 destinations. And like I said, we have no intention of being above market in terms of our yield. We will continue to do some amount of dynamic pricing. So if you're booking only a day or 2 days before, of course you're going to be paying more than the guy who booked 2 months ahead of time. But we are fully committed to ensuring that high quality premium bus services become accessible to one and all in this country.
Yeah, I think the younger generation, I myself, millennials and Gen Zs, I think they are more inclined towards it. Like, I remember the first time electric bus started in Pune, I was like, I will only travel. I actually skipped 2 or 3 buses and then went into the electric bus. I think it's more to do with the vibe. And yeah, but anyways. So thank you so much. I think we are almost run out of time. You have okay, we'll take one last question.
It's nothing technical, but since you mentioned your preference, so a lot, I mean, Delhi especially started warming to the idea of electric buses. People actively try to take an electric bus. So in the intercity market, do you see a preference where people are booking, preference or lack thereof towards actively booking an electric bus?
No. There is currently not enough data with us to give a clear answer that the customer prefers electric bus. The customer prefers a comfortable bus which does not stop for too long, that does not start malfunctioning if it is too hot outside, and the customer certainly doesn't want to take a bus that because of a power outage, the journey time goes from 6 hours to 9 hours. So that we know for sure. Whether the customer will pay a little extra for electric bus or whether they will prefer electric bus over ICE option, I don't think we have clear data as of now. Let's hope that happens, right? I think concerted efforts from the ecosystem. We are only at very few electric buses in India. We need to scale it up and change the narrative so that actually happens.
Yeah,
currently not so much.
I think we have barely like less than 1,000 electric buses running across this entire country. So it's really difficult to get that preference level data unless and until we do it at a very large scale for non-travelers as well. So once that is done, then we'll get to know. But anyways, I think it's buzzing now. It's a hard stop. So thank you so much. Thank you all of you. I think we'll just take a photo and then, yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot.